Recently, there came out an article in the Time magazine about the Zelensky's government in Ukraine and his relationship to the war. And I'm going to be here going basically line by line and taking this example of a hit piece article apart. I'm going to tell you why it's wrong, and I'm going to tell you exactly how it's wrong. First thing that we need to start off is to understand what this is and what this is not. This is not an objective write-up. This is not presented as an objective write-up. This is presented as an author's article. This is author's thought and perception of how he sees certain things put on a paper. So it is extremely crucial to understand that what's stated is in this article are not facts. He's not trying to be objective. And we need to respect that. This is democracy. This is where we can look at other people's opinions, critique those opinions without attacking the character of the person. So, first thing that we need to understand about this, I'm going to right now talk about what this author, who this author is. And what I don't want is for people to then say, oh, the author is untrustworthy, therefore whatever he wrote is untrue. I think that is a little bit unfair, and instead we should look at his prior works to kind of try to understand what's his mindset, where is he coming from, and understand what is motivating his judgments without right away coming to conclusions that he's maybe like a pro-Russian shill or like a sellout to Putin, to Kremlin. I don't think so. And I don't believe that we should think so as well. What I do think is that we need to understand the patterns and pitfalls that this man falls. Because some of his earlier articles that he wrote were extremely weird. Since 2014 especially, he wrote about a lot of things, like, for example, that Azov are Nazis, which they're not. He wrote about Eastern Ukrainians really wanting Russian forces to invade and would almost inevitably greet everyone with flowers, which we saw in reality didn't happen. He was writing that arming Ukraine would be an absolute devastation, that Ukraine just needs to bend over, and well, you know what would happen with a bend over Ukraine. So this person has a history of certain narratives within him. Potentially, we should give him a benefit of the doubt and then say, maybe that's what something he was thinking there. But it's important to know the history of where he's coming from, especially now that we're getting used to the war in Ukraine and we're getting used to Ukraine not being a headline in the news and there is just one correct version, but rather there are deep enough penetrations by the Russian propaganda for any kind of different opinions to seep in through and feed on the popularity of those pro-Russian narratives. An interesting thing about Simon Schuster, the author of this article, is that he was actually publicly stating many times, and this is not a quote because I'm translating from Russian because he's a fluent Russian speaker, is that he was saying in direct words that his endless love for Russia will never cease. That is his words, not mine. So with this said, please remember who the person that's writing this article is, but don't judge it too harshly right away. Let's go over the actual thing. So we start off and talk about Zelensky. He gives this initial presentation, and what I want to point the attention here is that Russian propaganda is really eager to specifically point out the first two words, that nobody believes in our victory, skipping the like I do part. Because when you look at the quote itself, it's an amazing quote, a great quote, a historic quote by a leader that is not bending the knee in the face of adversity. It's a person that is defying any challenges, that is putting all his time and effort to make sure that his country prevails against overwhelming odds. It's an amazing quote. But unfortunately, what this author does is he builds a different, darker narrative around the topic that leads the reader into the conclusion that we're going to get there. So we then go into the second part of the article, and you're welcome to always pause and read it with me, or just open it in the other window and see what I've highlighted. He discusses that it's only getting harder, that 20 months into the war, it's really tiring. And my question is, who is he trying to surprise? Did we not know that? He's not wrong. The problem is of what we're saying, that people get tired of the war, that Zelensky is talking themselves, is this tells me more about the world, that the world cannot keep their attention, like a person with a poor attention span that cannot focus on the things that are actually important, and instead they switch off to some other things. Which again, I'm not thinking that it's completely accurately true, but this is what the author is portraying. He has been explaining that in US, support for supplying weapons to Ukraine has fallen. Oh no, that is somewhat true, yeah. However, I am arguing that this is not because any actions of Zelensky. So putting these two things side by side is not completely irrelevant. In US, there is a political campaign specifically right now because of the elections. And those US internal politics is what drives the narrative. It's the perception of the war, not Ukrainian fight itself and not Zelensky itself that is as a core to this article. So this should have been is like how US politics are ruining support for the things that matter. But again, this is not the narrative that the author is building. I mean, he talked with Zelensky. Zelensky said, "How do you feel?" Angry. I'm angry all the time. Have you seen my videos? I am mad. Every time Western allies are dragging their feet, I'm screaming, yelling, spitting on my camera every time. Have to clean this lens every time I start recording because I'm so angry that we're still dragging our feet instead of supporting Ukraine. Can I blame Zelensky, a person whose people are dying every day by the Russian missile strikes that can be prevented, but because Western allies are drip-feeding support, we're still here over 600 days in? Why would not he be angry? I am more encouraged that he still feels anger. The passion is still there, that he's not giving up. He's not apathetic and saying, oh, well, we cannot do anything anymore. No. He's passionate. This is more relevant to me. Then he talks the usual spark of optimism. I think this is something we've seen Zelensky change, and I think this is something we've all been on the journey. The best picture that describes it is Zelensky's picture from Bucha. Do you remember the face when he saw those murdered civilians? This is nothing new. The fact that Zelensky is getting to the point without joking around is because he understands the gravity. He understands that his people's lives are at stake. It represents the leader of a nation that cares. He cares. Now, many times in this article, Simon is referring to some of the close presidential aides. And these aides never speak really well of Zelensky. He's only pulling quotes that are speaking ill of Zelensky. There's going to be a little bit of caveat here, because while he doesn't name who these people are, there is a little bit of a hint, and we're going to get there to points. So I want you to put a pin in this. Now, here he's being absolutely dishonest. He talks about that Zelensky is excluding any kind of negotiated solution. And what the author is implying here is that a negotiated solution is a possibility. He is literally using Russian propaganda. He is manipulating. There are no negotiated solutions with Russia. Russia is the aggressor. It's an inhuman state. Watch my video where I reminded you about the UN report about the tortured, raped, and killed people in Ukraine. There is no negotiation with a serial killer. There's only the prison sentence or death. That's it. And that's what awaits every single occupant on the territory of Ukraine and beyond that. So I think this is an openly dishonest statement implying that a negotiating solution is even possible or even, as he states itself, even remotely accepted by the Ukrainian society. And it's actually quite interesting because he tries to paint this picture of Zelensky being alone and deluded in his own thoughts. But also in the article, he states that all of the polls are saying the same things, that Ukrainians are not ready for negotiated solutions. Ukraine is a democracy. Is it the people driving the government decisions, or is it the government driving the people's decisions? I think it's a synergy a little bit here. But what we know for sure is that Ukrainians are not ready to give up. We see that every day. I see that every day in the courage of the Ukrainian armed forces and the defenders of Ukraine that are putting their lives at risk, at storming these Russian positions, resisting Russian occupiers, getting them the hell out of their territory. So when he states that, oh, it's just Zelensky doesn't want to give up, he's completely dismissing the whole population of Ukraine that doesn't want to give up, that doesn't want to stop resisting, that are there in majority to stop this Russian aggression here and now. Zelensky describes it as a state of bill. Again, the message here, if you read it without reading the whole of the article, without the building of the narrative here, then this is a very strong message that you see, that it definitely is a competition of wills. Ben Hodges has been quoting it many, many times, that wars, especially big wars like war between Ukraine and Russia right now, with Russian aggression being absolutely unjustified, it is now for the will of Ukrainians to resist long term that will define the ultimate defeat of Russians. Here he again talks about visit to the United States. And again, I want to underline here that this is not because of anything that Ukraine does. Ukraine is being very, very effective with what it's being delivered, with the equipment that is having. My problem is that there's still not a decisive commitment to make sure Ukraine wins in a reasonable amount of time. And instead it's drip feeding. And now this drip feeding suddenly is not paying off. Who would have thought? More importantly, why is now this a political topic? Why support for Israel is not a political topic and support for Ukraine is? So I want us to be very, very clear about this. Whatever he's drafting here about the potential reduction in the support for Ukraine, this has nothing to do with what Ukraine does and what the position of Zelensky is. This is purely American inside politics. And Zelensky is absolutely right here. Like, he's just being honest. It's like, what would happen that if US stops supplying weapons? Zelensky said, we will lose. And that is, I mean, I talk a lot about that Ukrainians will not stop resisting, and they won't, because that's who Ukrainians are. But Ukrainians themselves just don't have the power to resist those Soviet stockpiles. They need weapons to resist Russia. They need weapons to kill the occupiers. They need weapons to take down the whole stockpiles of the Soviet Union. They need weapons to also get away from the stockpiles of the North Korea. You know, all the evil regimes are now coming together to make sure Ukraine gets dominated. And to that, this Simon Schuster says, negotiate. What a dishonest position to be in. Zelensky talks about the energy network here and saying that last year people blamed Russia for bombing the energy network. However, now we have a year to prepare. So if the energy goes out again, they're going to blame us. It's a very responsible statement. It's a responsible statement. It's a statement that I want my politicians to make. Taking responsibility. Holy crap. Like, that is That is really responsible. A person taking responsibility for the things that even he cannot have a control over, that Russia will shoot missiles, that is balls. And here, Simon Schuster is again referring to some kind of aides, saying that Zelensky will never change his thoughts, that it's all he's thinking about, and so on. We're gonna get there. Let's get there. And then we have this bizarre quote, which requires a little bit of a further explanations. He says here that there was a political leadership demand to retake the city of Horlivka. I'm going to show you on a deep state map right now so you know where it is. This is Bakhmut, and this is Horlivka. So overall, this is not some kind of crazy idea. But important thing to kind of look deep into this here is that this is not how Ukrainian command structure works. A political decision doesn't go directly to some kind of area commanders, and then area commanders are acting on it. What happens is the general staff gives the order, and then the commanders execute of the order. This is not what we see described here. What I see described here is a potential planning. So there is a political orders. Can you take Horlivka? And then the person responds on the end. Yes, potentially we can, but we don't have any weapons, enough weapons to do so. We don't have enough manpower. We don't have enough artillery support for us to do it. So we cannot execute on this maneuver. Sorry. There is no follow-up to this. Why is this here? Because this brings a narrative forward, again, that he's supposedly making some kind of demands from the military that military cannot deliver. That is not what's happening here. Zelensky doesn't give orders to the military directly. Zaluzhny does. More importantly, we know that Zelensky is very, very much hands off from the direct command of the troops. It's Zaluzhny and his team, the general staff, that are commanding the troops. So you cannot say, maybe there is a political desire. It's like Zelensky saying, can we take Horlivka? Okay, let's see what we have on the ground, because information is not perfect. He doesn't see all the things. What do we need to retake it? And then the commander can say, well, I need like 1,000 tanks more. I need like 2 more brigades and maybe 3 more artillery brigades. And then maybe I can try to attack Horlivka and take part of it. Understand what it is. Like, it sounds that there was some kind of a political planning or discussion, and it's just taken completely out of a context to help paint the narrative. This is interesting, that it's a criticism that's been layered on Zelensky about the fact that there are right now supposedly reserves of draft drying up, which is not completely true, but point is, this has been something that Zelensky has been criticized internally, both by the Ukrainian military and also actually the US officials. I believe that was Lloyd Austin, but again, don't quote me on that. I don't remember who specifically it was. But they said that Ukraine needs to mobilize and draft also younger people, because so far it's been Zelensky's policy to draft mostly elder population. Do you know why? You wanna guess why before I tell you? You guessed correctly. Because Zelensky cares that the youth survives, because he wants future for his country. And this author takes that desire to preserve as much as he can the younger population, to not send 17, 18, 20, which Zelensky could, because it's a total war for survival of the country. Zelensky could issue order like to draft 16-year-olds, whatever. Like it's a total war, absolute carnage. But he wants to preserve some kind of Ukrainian nation. So author takes that noble idea and twists it and says, haha, Ukraine is running out of manpower. This is true. This is true that there are less capable people and fully aged people. And more importantly, there was indeed a corruption that was widespread in the recruitment officers. If Zelensky wanted to make sure that these recruitment officers will again regain some kind of face, they needed to be scrapped. You needed to do it. And we get, if you read a bit later, where Simon completely openly paints a catch-22 situation where he's on one side saying that, wow, corruption in Ukraine, so bad, totally wrong. But also Zelensky cabinet fighting corruption, also bad because it destabilizes existing structures. So he is dishonest in his overviewing of the situation. What we saw and what I learned even from this excerpt is that Zelensky is dead set that his government stays crispy clean and fights corruption as much as they can. I would love if someone was following my leaders in my country, and mostly probably I can say like in Denmark, but in Latvia, let's say in Latvia, that some journalists would follow leaders of my country and say, you know, the only thing that they talk about behind closed doors is how they can fight the corruption while they're trying to stay as clean as possible. Zero tolerance to corruption. Fuck me. I wish my government was that. And he's painting it as something bad. Yermak here talks about that we sleep in the rooms that are 2 by 3 meters. We earn only like $1,000. This for a Westerner's ears, that might come across a little bit wrongly, like he's trying to say how poor we are specifically. But we need to understand that 1,000, 1,500 is normal for Ukrainians. It's average. This is nothing absolutely out there in the space. What he's telling here, Yermak, is more of a saying, like, we're really not trying to live lavishly here. He's trying to be humble. That's what he's saying. He's not pitying them. That's not what the point is, but it might come across, and I just want to warn you about this. Okay, I cannot postpone it any longer. Simon here refers again to some kind of aides that are again critical of Zelensky. And we were guessing who that is. Who is that person close to Zelensky that just is so against him? Again, no one that supports Zelensky is properly quoted here. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Alexi Arukh. If you know who it is, you know. If you don't know who it is, then I'll tell you. So Alexi Arukh was one of many advisors in the office of the president. Not Zelensky's advisor, just one of the staffs. He's extremely populistic. He's a great speaker. He became really popular because at the start of the war, as he claimed himself, he came out to the public and just made outrageous numbers of how many Russian troops Ukrainians were destroying. On that hype and popularity wave, he got a lot of clout. So Alexi Arukh, since then, has fallen to the deepest ends of anti-Zelensky propaganda. He has been thrown out of the office because of his misappropriated claims about the Russian attacks on Ukraine. Since then, he declared Zelensky, as you can read here, compared him to a dictator, Hitler, stuff like that. He is targeting the remnants of the pro-Russian population inside Ukraine for his campaign, because he openly declared that he's the one, by the way, that is pushing for elections in Ukraine to be held as soon as possible, and he is running on the "we need to be Russian" platform. He is picking up from those pro-Russian parties. The guy can have a lot of discussion about himself, but what I want you to take away from this, before you get really mad and try to read up about Arukh and everything else, he's a nobody. He doesn't matter. He never did matter. His position was never that important. He's just a talker, a speaker. He's blabbering a lot. That's it. That's it. He has no real influence. Right now, he fled Ukraine. He is not even in Ukraine anymore. He's living in EU. Alexi Arukh is a populist that is driving the hype, that is seeing his political career on a pro-Russian narrative. And this man is openly claiming that it was him that spoke with Simon Schuster on many, many occasions. And to be honest, when we compare the pattern of speaking, you can open Alexi's interviews. If you have following them, you can right away compare the quotes and be quite certain that this is indeed him. So takeaway here, some nobody that's been since disregarded and thrown out because he's wrong has been saying things critical because of his political campaign. Don't mind any attention. It's just very nice when you have secret sources rather than stating who they are, right? It wouldn't be sounding as nice as a ex-advisor to the general office of Zelensky that since then made a lot of scandalous statements and is now running for president himself on the semi-pro-Russian platform. That has the same kick as one of the aides of President Zelensky, close aides of President Zelensky. You see what I'm going with this. Then we go into this defensive minister situation with Reznikov. Reznikov, there was for a long time trouble here because the Simon Schuster paints that Zelensky held on to Reznikov despite the problems, ignoring all of the problems within Reznikov corruption. Reznikov was dismissed because of corruption, and there are probes that are happening into that yet still. What we need to understand is that Reznikov has been instrumental in securing weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Reznikov was what allowed Ukraine to get a lot of weapons. So when you're put on the scale, you have certain levels of corruption. Not nice. Like, food is being bought a little bit more expensively, well, significantly more expensively. It's not nice, right? But then on the other hand, this guy, the same guy, is also delivering you the weapons that allow you to stay in the war. What do you do? It's a tough question for Zelensky to tackle. And eventually he came to a right conclusion. He says, no, we need to be clear with corruption. It's not a black and white position to be in. And then it's interesting that one person that additionally Schuster is using here to represent corruption in Ukraine is this Shurma guy. So Shurma, the funny thing is that what he's charged with is not even himself. Like, the charges are not about Shurma. The charges are against the brother of Shurma. What essentially the situation, I'm not going to go deep into the situation, but you can try to read it into it. So there are, in the region they're talking about, the brother is operating in, that was under Russian control, there are 72 solar power plants, and Shurma's brother is having a partial ownership of 3 of those power plants. There is an investigation that is ongoing, and he actually states that investigation that is ongoing. But it's an investigation into his brother and potential connection to his brother here. But this is democracy. We're talking about the rule of law, right? Innocent until proven guilty. No? What is this then? It's a manipulation, and it's very interesting that this guy specifically pointed out. Firstly, because I think he's sleazy AF. You know why? Because he's from the pro-Russian party. This guy, for a longer time, has been part of the party of the regions, which was the party that President Yanukovych was the part of, and then he was part of the opposition bloc, the pro-Russian remnants of the... So he's not from Zelensky's party. More importantly, this guy doesn't really hold any kind of super important position. He is the deputy of the head of the office of the president. Again, deputy of the head of the office, not the head of the office even. So he's not the most important person. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that is wrong with Ukraine, and there's a lot of very important people that can be caught up. So pointing out a person that's actually not that important, and again, not even him, supposedly his brother, and then just painting it as this something says about Zelensky and Ukraine is very dishonest. Again, we're coming back to the fact that Ukraine is supposedly fighting corruption because there is a probe in him, right? So is it bad or good then? Why don't you focus that, hey, since then there is a proper probe already ongoing? The focus is what matters here. Then we talk about Gaza, and that is true. But Ukraine is also supporting Israel, and Ukraine understands that, yes, for US, Israel is important, and Ukraine should be as important as Israel. It's nothing wrong with Zelensky and his office acknowledging that if the focus shifts fully to Israel, then Ukraine is going to be in tough waters. Again, this is just reality. Are we blaming them for being in touch with reality? Also, yes, this one that Zelensky was supposedly to go to Israel, but he was rejected, saying that it's not the time was right. This was speculated a lot, but there is no concrete proof of that. He's putting it as a fact. Then he talks about the internal politics and the GOP opposition, and he talks about that, Ukrainian support has no chance. Load of crap. Absolute nonsense. What is in US is, unfortunately, because of the Republican underperformance in the elections for the House, they didn't secure big enough majority. So the Republicans in the House have to deal with the far-right shitty-ass Trumpists that are pretty sure paid from Moscow, at least part of them, that are insane on the trying to make sure that anything that spites Biden is good, and if it spites Ukraine is better because it supports Putin. That's what's happening. Majority of Republicans are decent, knowledgeable people that understand that Ukraine and what Ukraine is doing is basically incredible return on investment, with 5% dedication from the defense budget, destroying and obliterating Russian military, not only Russian, the Soviet heritage, ending the Soviet heritage of the region, is incredible. They understand that. If that bill is put on the floor, there would be the votes. When he states that the support for Ukraine would stand no chance, he's lying. I was talking a lot about manipulation, but this is an open lie. And then to finally end it up here with this regard again to Arestovich. Arestovich is now openly calling Zelensky a dictator, comparing him to Hitler. You can draw into this as much as you want. For me, it's very clear that Arestovich has fallen beyond any kind of valid criticism point already. He is definitely trying to get his audience. He wants to stay relevant. But taking his word and using a lot of those things to drive this narrative that, hey, Zelensky is this deluded, secluded guy, that actually no one in his office already supports him, that he's lonely, that he's alone, that there are no support from people, that there are no support from his staff, that the even army don't understand his commands now, is a lie and a manipulation. And this article is dog shit. And I hope you will take it with that. Thank you so much for watching it, guys. I love you all. Slava Ukraini. And I'll see you guys next time.